Hi, my name is Chris, aka ThePhilosophersGames, and I just watched The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. I just came back home from cinema like an hour ago, so these are my first impressions of the film, and they will be spoiler-free. I will record another video where I will go into more depth, or maybe make a live stream about it. We will see how I handle this, but there will be more content regarding the film. But let us start. Overall, I must admit that I had a good time seeing the film, and it's, in my opinion, actually a very solid film. But on the other side, it is not more than that. And this was kind of what I was expecting from the film, which is, from my perspective, a good thing. I got what I expected, what I paid for. So I'm definitely not disappointed with the film. And that's already, after Rings of Power, I think a very good thing. I think it's kind of refreshing, for the lack of a better word, when you see an adaptation and the writers can actually tell a story straightforward, and it works. It's amazing. More writers should try that out. As a huge fan of the books, and as somebody who makes Lord of the Rings lore videos on YouTube, I can tell you that the section from Appendix A of the Lord of the Rings is adapted in this film, and it's mostly lore accurate with some minor changes which I can't disclose here because it would be too spoiler heavy in my opinion. So we do this in the spoiler review in more detail, I think, or in the live stream then. But definitely I was very pleased to see, okay, these are the plot points, and they just follow along and connect everything and enhance a few scenes here and there. But overall, the changes made sense for the film adaptation, so they worked out pretty well. There are even some cool, interesting little details they added here. For example, and maybe this can be considered a minor spoiler, but it was already in the trailer and you see it relatively early in the film, and I have to talk about something. So, minor spoiler here, you will see an elephant in the film, and in a confrontation, including the protagonist, Hera, she will say something like, "Wasn't there a poem about a mystic creature?" And then she quotes from Tolkien's poem Oliphant that you find in the Adventures of Tom Bombadil. And in The Lord of the Rings itself, and there it is quoted by Sam, it's an old poem of the Shire, and linguistically the Shire and the people of Rohan have like common roots, you could say. So it makes sense that maybe both cultures know this particular poem, which I find is a very interesting idea. I watched the film in German, and it uses the German translation of that poem. So in the English version, it should be, "I make the earth shake." The German translation of that line would be, "Erde bebt bange." That's, in my opinion, a cool little reference that made me smile while watching the film. And like I said, I like the idea because the, let's call it, language of the hobbits, their names and so on, are related to the language of the people of Rohan. So there's a connection, so it makes sense that they have like common culture that maybe know some poems or legends, and there's some overlap here and there. So that also works. The idea that there are oliphants in this film is also an interesting one, but I think you can make an argument in this direction. They are, of course, not directly mentioned in the story itself, so it's an interpretation of one particular line, and it reads, "They were in great force, for they were joined by enemies of Gondor that landed in the mouths of Lefnui and Isen." From this perspective, it sounds like they came per ship, and there are not that many enemies that have potential access to ships and can just go there, and are also enemies of Gondor. The people from Harad, from the far south, would make sense in this context, and it is those people who have the oliphants. You can call it maybe stretching this line quite a bit, and for sure they did, but on the other side, yeah, it's maybe distantly plausible. But these are now very small details. Let us not go too deep into that and talk about some broader topics. First of all, the pacing of the film was good in my opinion. There was consistently something happening, scenes were not overstaying their welcome. I would also say the film overall did not overstay its welcome. It knows it's a shorter story that we already kind of know because it's very similar to what happens in The Two Towers, but that is the nature of the story because Theoden in The Lord of the Rings does the same thing as Helm Hammerhand in the past, so of course it's very similar. On top, they use the Peter Jackson film adaptation style and also the music and the art design and so on. As a result, of course, it's very similar to what Peter Jackson did, and that is, I guess, to be expected, if I'm completely honest. If you are looking for a completely new portrayal of Lord of the Rings that is very different from what Peter Jackson did back in the day with his Lord of the Rings films, then this is not the film for you because it is very close. The pacing is very close to how Peter Jackson paced his films. The style, the camera, the editing, everything is so similar. Even one of the original writers is working on this film, Philippa Boyens. So there's a lot of similarity between what Peter Jackson did and what you will see in War of the Rohirrim. One little thing that you could definitely ask is, why do I need this film then? Because I have Two Towers, and I also have to say Two Towers is definitely better than War of the Rohirrim. It's not even close in this regard. You just get a very solid anime adaptation of the background story of the Hornburg, the Hornburg, and some other details of the people of Rohan, including their king Helm Hammerhand. One topic that was discussed a bit, let's say, controversial when the first trailers came out was that the story is told from the perspective of Helm's daughter Hera. In the books, the daughter of Helm exists, but she has no name. Tolkien never named her, and she plays no role. We know nothing about her or what happened to her. Only about Helm's sons, Hales and Hama, which also appear in the film. And people criticize that it's not told from Helm's perspective, or from the perspective of, for example, Frealaf, who also appears, of course, in the film. Though I have to admit that I think it's a somewhat smart decision to use this blank page character. First of all, it gives the writers a lot of options to form this character, as we don't know anything about her. And then I also think to tell the story properly, you need like a different perspective for it. There are different reasons why that is necessary. It has to do with how the story unfolds later to its end. And there you'd simply need a different character as protagonist. Helm would not make a good protagonist for this adaptation, so I can completely understand the decisions of the writers here. Helm is an interesting character who makes some interesting decisions that can definitely be criticized. And having or seeing his decisions from the perspective of somebody else is, in my opinion, a very smart idea to give you a better perspective of everything and how the plot unfolds from there. A concern that people often express when it comes to Hera is that she might be a Mary Sue. And I would say yes, to some degree she definitely is a Mary Sue. But for me she worked quite well in the story, I have to admit. Simply because it's a very dramatic and tragic story, and the drama, the tragedy is still stronger than Hera. As a result, she works in context of the story. Though if you think about her, you definitely notice, well, she hasn't many weaknesses, has she? And further, she's also not consistently rubbing it in your face how clever, smart and strong she is. So overall, I liked her character, but I can see that some people might find the characters in this film maybe a bit too shallow. But let us move to another interesting concept or idea they implemented in this film, which I personally really liked. Of course, the story or the history is always told by the victors at the end, and Tolkien further wrote his fantasy book, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, with mythology in mind as well. In mythology, often things are exaggerated and sometimes not very accurate, but at times there's also like a little bit of truth in it here and there, if that makes sense. And what they do here in the film, they show you kind of how it really happened. And if you know the story from The Lord of the Rings, you think, okay, this is how this legend could have formed. There's a legend, I won't spoil it here, about Helm Hammerhand, to be precise, and about his time in the Hornburg. And they show like two events happening kind of in parallel, including Helm Hammerhand and something else, which I won't spoil here. And then you see the result and how this legend could have come up. And I found this was a very cool idea, to be honest. You have to be careful with this because you can demystify the mystery, the legend, the mythology. And this is not always smart to do, but in this context, I found this was smartly done. And I really thought about this. Yeah, that's actually a very cool idea to kind of explain what happens and show it on screen for it to make sense in the style and basically the rules of this world they are currently adapting. So I have to describe it a bit cryptic here to not spoil too much, but that was a detail I really liked in this adaptation. Now let us come to some points that I would criticize about it and why it's just a solid adaptation and not a masterpiece, I guess. But one thing definitely is that the characters are often a bit too shallow. I mentioned it in the Hera section, and Hera, in my opinion, is potentially one of the more complex characters already in this film, which makes sense because she is a protagonist. But I would have wished, especially as a book lore friend, that they would have explored some other characters and their motivations a little bit more here and there. So if you expect like a deep character study of some of these side characters, you won't get that. For example, and this is maybe my biggest point of critique, the antagonist of this story doesn't work too well. I would say it's okay, but don't think too much about this character, unfortunately. Like a more interesting and more developed and complex antagonist would have been more interesting, in my opinion. On the other side, I guess the story doesn't really need an antagonist that is very complex, to be honest. It's a very simple story, and that is all the story wants to be, but I think this character is sometimes a bit difficult to understand what his motivations are. Well, his motivation is very simple to understand, to be honest, but why he goes this far, and especially why are people listening to him, because he's not a great leader at all. So why are people following him? This is too underdeveloped, in my opinion, to explain this overall conflict. I, as a lore fan, have some additional context to why these people would potentially go to war against Rohan. I can understand this as a lore fan, but the film is not good exploring or explaining this in too much detail. One thing that I also noticed and potentially want to criticize here at least a bit is the animation quality and the quality of the visuals. Overall, we have already seen it previously in the trailers that it's kind of a mixed bag, and I would say also in the final product, seeing on the big screen, it's still a mixed bag. So it's a bit of a roller coaster. So sometimes the quality goes up and then it goes down again, which is a bit unfortunate, especially for a cinema release. If this would be a series or Netflix release or something, I would definitely say, well, it's okay, I guess. But for a cinema film, like, I don't know. I have seen better anime films in cinema that had far superior visual qualities. And this film also cost $30 million, so it was a budget that I could find on Wikipedia. As a result, I would have expected a bit more. And one problem that is very noticeable for me personally is they use a lot of 3D for the background and then have the drawn characters, for example, in the foreground. And sometimes this doesn't match perfectly and the scene as a result looks a bit cheap. And that's not so great, to be honest. Still, I also have to admit that it is not, for me personally, immersion breaking. I could still immerse myself, and I'm very good at this, that at some point I can completely block out that this is animated and I see it like as real, if that makes sense. There were some decent scenes, for example, in Torchlight, how the faces looked, or in some of the snow scenes I really liked, where they also had torches and walked towards the screen, that I felt like, okay, that looks cool, potentially due to the snow obscuring so much, but that scene worked quite well for me. And in the film also appear some creatures, I won't spoil what, but there's for sure a bit of fan service. And those creatures also visually looked quite well, and also the animation quality seemed to go up there, but then it goes here and there down again. Like I said, it's a mixed bag. I know not every film can be red line, but I would have wished or expected a bit more here, to be honest. Especially for a cinema release, but the trailers already give you a good impression on how the quality is, and I felt like on the big screen, on the cinema, it definitely looked better than in the trailers. But I have seen better animation in anime films before, so there's definitely room for improvement here, I guess. There are definitely more negative but also positive points to discuss, and some details as well. We might do this in a live stream or make another spoiler heavy video for this. I'm not sure yet, but if you don't want to miss it, maybe hit subscribe. I also would appreciate if you press the like button and leave a comment. Tell me how you like the film, or if you're looking forward to it, or what you think about it. But let us come to the final conclusion here. The film is unsurprisingly very niche. And somebody sitting in front of me in the cinema said after the film finished, well, it's exactly like the Hornburg battle in the Two Towers. And yeah, it is very similar to that. It is made by people who imitate the style of Peter Jackson and his team making the Lord of the Rings adaptation, especially the part where they have the Battle of the Hornburg in it. And they succeed with it. In my opinion, they adapted it pretty well. They also have the license for all of this because it's by the same company. As a result, they have access to the Howard Shore music. They have also access to the art design, so Meduseld looks like Meduseld in the Peter Jackson films. Further, also Miranda Otto, who played Eowyn in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films, is narrating all of this. So you definitely see that there are by nature similarities. And then Theoden, as mentioned earlier, is also basically using the same strategy as Helm Hammerhand for his Battle of the Hornburg. As a result, both battles are by nature very similar in many ways. There are some differences, but also a lot of similarities. As a result, the question you have to ask yourself, do I need a second Battle of the Hornburg in my life? And do I want to learn a bit more about Helm Hammerhand and the background story of all of this? If the answer is yes, then yeah, check out this movie. It's a solid one. You can watch it. It's not perfect. It's no masterpiece, but you can have a good time with it. If your answer is no, then maybe it's not the film for you. If you look for something completely new, a new approach to how to adapt Lord of the Rings, it's not that. Thank you for watching.